One of the most painful experiences a person can go through is realizing they gave genuine love, loyalty, and emotional effort to someone who failed to value it. When someone plays with your emotions, betrays your trust, or takes your love for granted, the immediate reaction is often emotional confusion. You start questioning yourself. You replay everything in your mind. And somewhere deep inside, you begin wanting them to finally understand what they lost. You want them to regret it. You want them to see your value. You want them to realize how deeply they hurt you. And naturally, the mind starts trying to prove worth to the very person who failed to appreciate it in the first place. That is where emotional suffering deepens. Because the moment your healing becomes dependent on whether they finally recognize your value, your emotional peace stays connected to someone who already disrespected your heart. You continue waiting for validation from the same person who created the wound, and that keeps you emotionally trapped. You start thinking things like, if they come back, then I'll know I mattered. Or, if they regret losing me, then maybe my love was real enough. But your worth was never dependent on their realization. Your value did not suddenly disappear because someone failed to appreciate it correctly. A person's inability to value you is not proof that you lacked value. It is proof of their limitations, their emotional immaturity, or their inability to recognize what they had while they had it. But emotionally hurt people often internalize rejection as a reflection of themselves. They begin believing they were not attractive enough, patient enough, loving enough, or important enough. And because of that, they start over-explaining, over-giving, or emotionally chasing closure from someone who already showed through actions that they were careless with the connection. This is why the first real step toward emotional power is stopping the need to prove yourself. Because the more you try convincing someone to value you, the more emotionally dependent you become on their approval. And approval gained through chasing rarely brings peace anyway. Even if they eventually return, the emotional wound remains because your self-worth became tied to their recognition. Real healing works differently. It begins the moment you stop trying to earn acknowledgement from people who had every opportunity to appreciate you already. It begins when you realize that someone who truly values you does not need endless reminders of your worth. They naturally protect what matters to them, and that realization changes your emotional energy completely. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop trying to prove your loyalty. You stop fighting to be understood by someone who repeatedly misunderstood your value. Instead, you begin redirecting your energy inward toward healing, toward rebuilding confidence, toward restoring emotional peace that was damaged by betrayal or emotional neglect. And slowly your focus shifts from, how do I make them regret hurting me, to how do I become emotionally whole again regardless of what they do. That shift is powerful because now your emotional recovery is no longer controlled by someone else's actions. You are no longer waiting for apologies, regret, or validation to move forward. Your healing becomes your responsibility instead of their decision. And ironically, this is often the moment people finally begin realizing your value. Not when you chase them emotionally, but when you stop needing them to confirm your worth at all. Because confidence without validation feels different. It feels grounded, it feels emotionally strong, it feels untouchable. And sometimes, the greatest realization after heartbreak is understanding that your value never disappeared when they failed to appreciate you. You simply forgot for a moment that real worth never needs to beg to be recognized. One of the biggest mistakes people make after being hurt is believing emotional revenge will heal them. They think if they argue harder, post indirect messages, make the other person jealous, or emotionally attack them enough, somehow the pain will disappear. In the moment, those reactions may feel powerful because anger creates temporary emotional release. But underneath that anger, the attachment often still remains, because emotional reactions keep the connection alive. Every angry message, every emotional confrontation, every attempt to make them feel bad still gives them access to your energy. It shows they still have emotional control over your thoughts, your reactions, and your peace. And unfortunately, people who already took you for granted rarely learn your value through emotional chaos. They learn it through absence. That is why silence becomes so powerful. Not silent treatment used as manipulation. Not emotional games. Real silence. The kind that comes from emotional detachment and self-respect. The kind where you stop explaining yourself endlessly. Stop reacting to every action. Stop trying to force someone to understand the pain they cause. Because true silence removes emotional access. And when emotional access disappears, reality finally becomes visible. See, when someone knows they can still easily trigger your emotions, they subconsciously feel your presence is still available to them. Even after hurting you, they still feel connected to your energy because you continue reacting. But when you suddenly become calm, distant, and emotionally unavailable to the drama, something changes psychologically. Now they are left alone with their own thoughts. There are no more emotional reactions distracting them. No more constant reminders that you are still emotionally waiting. No more reassurance that you will always remain available no matter how badly they treated you. And in that silence, regret often grows much louder because people tend to fully realize emotional value once they can no longer access it freely. Your absence starts becoming noticeable. Your emotional support becomes noticeable. Your attention becomes noticeable. The comfort of knowing you care deeply becomes noticeable. Things they overlooked while emotionally comfortable suddenly become emotionally visible because now they are gone. And this is what many people misunderstand about silence. Silence is not weakness. It is emotional discipline. It is choosing peace over emotional chaos. It is refusing to keep reopening wounds through endless reactions because reactions keep pain active. Silence allows healing to begin. Now, this does not mean silence is easy. In fact, it can feel incredibly difficult at first. Your mind wants answers, your emotions want expression, your pain wants acknowledgement. But every time you resist the urge to emotionally react impulsively, you slowly reclaim your emotional power back. You stop feeding the cycle. You stop giving your energy to someone who already disrespected it. You stop trying to force guilt, regret, or understanding from someone who may not even be emotionally mature enough to give it properly. And instead, your energy starts returning to you. That shift changes everything internally because now your focus is no longer revenge. It becomes healing, it becomes peace, it becomes emotional freedom. And ironically, that emotional distance often creates far deeper regret than any emotional reaction ever could. Because people can defend themselves against anger. They can argue against words. They can justify emotional conflict in their own mind. But silence is different. Silence leaves them alone with the emotional reality of your absence, and sometimes the quietest goodbye creates the loudest regret inside the people who thought they would always have access to your heart, no matter how carelessly they treated it. One of the biggest misconceptions people have after heartbreak is believing that transformation is only physical. They think the answer is immediately looking better, posting better pictures, changing appearance, or trying to make the other person jealous visually. And while physical self-care can absolutely help rebuild confidence, real transformation goes much deeper than appearance. Because someone can change how they look externally while still feeling broken internally. True glow-up starts emotionally. It begins the moment you stop allowing heartbreak to define your value. It begins when you stop waking up every day emotionally trapped inside betrayal, rejection, or disappointment. It begins when your healing becomes about rebuilding yourself instead of trying to prove something to someone else. And that internal shift changes everything. See, emotional pain affects your entire energy. When someone hurts you deeply, it can make you feel emotionally heavy. Your confidence weakens, your peace disappears. Your mind becomes consumed with overthinking and emotional attachment. Even if you look good externally, Emotionally, you still feel unstable inside. That is why emotional healing matters first, because confidence is not created by appearance alone. Real confidence comes from emotional stability. It comes from self-respect. It comes from knowing your worth without needing constant validation from someone else. And people feel that energy immediately. A person who is healed emotionally carries themselves differently. Their presence feels calmer. Their reactions feel more controlled. They no longer chase attention desperately. They no longer seek validation from the people who hurt them. Instead, they become emotionally grounded within themselves. That emotional groundedness is powerful because it creates a kind of presence that cannot be faked. You begin speaking differently, thinking differently, carrying yourself differently. You stop trying to prove your value because internally you already recognize it. And ironically, this is often when people who once took you for granted start noticing the difference most strongly. Not because of appearance alone, but because your energy no longer feels emotionally dependent on them. You are no longer waiting, no longer chasing, no longer emotionally collapsing over their choices. Instead, you are rebuilding your life, your confidence, your routines, your peace. And that emotional independence changes the entire dynamic because emotionally healed people feel rare. In a world where many people operate from insecurity, emotional chaos, or validation seeking, someone who is emotionally centered feels unforgettable. Their energy creates calm instead of pressure. Their confidence feels natural instead of performative. Their presence feels peaceful instead of emotionally draining. And that kind of transformation creates lasting impact. Now, this does not mean healing happens overnight. Emotional glow-up is not instant. Some days still hurt, some memories still return, some wounds still need time. But the difference is that now you are healing with intentions. Instead of remaining emotionally trapped in the pain, you begin investing in yourself emotionally. You create healthier habits. You protect your peace more carefully. You stop abandoning yourself emotionally just to keep someone else close. And little by little, your entire identity starts rebuilding stronger than before. Not because heartbreak destroyed you, but because it forced you to reconnect with yourself in ways you never had before. And eventually something powerful happens. You stop wanting revenge. You stop needing validation. You stop caring whether they regret it or not, because your transformation is no longer about them. It becomes about you. And sometimes the most unforgettable glow-up is not the one people see with their eyes. It is the emotional strength they feel from someone who turned heartbreak into self-respect, peace, and unshakable confidence. One of the strangest psychological realities about human connection is that people often do not fully feel the value of someone's presence while they still have constant access to it. As long as they believe your attention, care, and emotional energy will always remain available no matter what they do, they rarely experience the true emotional consequences of losing you. Comfort creates certainty, and certainty often reduces urgency. When someone knows you will always reply, always forgive, always stay emotionally available, they stop fearing your absence. Not necessarily because they are evil or intentionally cruel, but because human nature often becomes comfortable with what feels permanent. That is why emotional chasing rarely creates respect. The more you chase, explain, or constantly prove your loyalty, the more emotionally predictable you become. And predictability removes emotional tension. The other person stops feeling the possibility of truly losing you because your actions continually reassure them that you will remain there no matter how inconsistently they behave. But everything changes the moment you genuinely stop chasing, not fake detachment, not temporary silence used to provoke a reaction. Real emotional detachment, the kind where your focus genuinely returns to your own life, your own peace, and your own emotional healing. The kind where you stop measuring your value based on whether they text, call, or pay attention to you. The kind where your emotional energy is no longer revolving around their choices. That shift changes the emotional dynamic immediately, because now, for the first time, uncertainty appears. And uncertainty creates reflection. When someone can no longer predict your emotional availability, their mind naturally begins questioning the connection differently. They notice your absence more clearly. They notice the emotional comfort you once provided. They notice the consistency they may have taken for granted. And suddenly, the emotional certainty they once relied on disappears. This is where curiosity often returns, not because you manipulated them into it, but because your energy genuinely changed. You are no longer emotionally chasing them for attention or validation. Your emotional center is no longer attached to their behavior. And that emotional independence creates a completely different presence. People feel when your attention is no longer focused on them, even without words, because emotional energy shifts behavior naturally. You stop overreacting. You stop constantly checking for responses. You stop making them the center of your emotional world. And without realizing it, your absence begins creating emotional space where reflection can happen. Now they are left with their own thoughts, their own memories, their own awareness of what the connection used to feel like when your energy was fully present. And that emotional distance often creates regret more effectively than emotional confrontation ever could. Because while arguments create defensiveness, absence creates awareness. Silence creates observation. Distance creates perspective. And perspective often reveals emotional value that comfort previously hid. But here is the most important part. This shift only becomes powerful when it is real. If you are pretending to detach while secretly obsessing every second, your emotional state remains attached internally. Real detachment happens when your peace genuinely stops depending on their response. That is when your energy changes authentically. And authenticity is what people feel most strongly. You become calmer, more focused, more emotionally grounded. You stop trying to force outcomes and start rebuilding your own life instead. And ironically, this is often the exact moment someone begins wondering whether they truly lost access to you emotionally. Because people rarely reflect deeply when they feel emotionally secure in your constant availability. They reflect when your attention is no longer guaranteed. And sometimes, the moment you finally stop chasing someone emotionally is the exact moment they begin chasing the emotional presence they once assumed would always stay. One of the saddest truths about relationships is that people often do not fully recognize the value of loyalty, consistency, and genuine emotional support while they still have easy access to it. Human nature has a tendency to become comfortable with what feels constant. When someone is always there, always understanding, always forgiving, and always emotionally available, that presence can slowly become something expected instead of appreciated. And that is where people begin taking love for granted. Not always because they intentionally want to hurt someone, but because familiarity can create emotional blindness. They stop noticing the little things, the emotional support, the patience, the care, the consistency, the comfort of knowing someone genuinely loved them. All of it starts blending into the background because they subconsciously believe it will always remain there no matter what. But nothing reveals value more clearly than absence, because absence removes emotional comfort. Suddenly, the messages are gone, the emotional support is gone, the constant reassurance is gone. The presence they once leaned on without fully appreciating is no longer available in the same way. And that is when reality starts becoming emotionally visible. See, while someone still has access to your love, they can delay reflection. They can distract themselves. They can avoid fully confronting the consequences of their behavior because your emotional availability continues softening the impact of their choices. But when your energy genuinely leaves the dynamic, the emotional contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Now they experience life without what they once took for granted, and that experience creates perspective. They begin noticing moments where your support used to exist. They recognize how peaceful your consistency felt. They realize how much emotional effort you quietly gave without demanding constant recognition for it. Things they overlooked while comfortable suddenly feel significant once absent. This is why regret often arrives late, because people rarely understand the emotional value of someone who is constantly present. They understand it when that presence disappears and leaves space behind. And in that space, memories become louder. Emotional comparisons begin. Reflection deepens. The warmth they once ignored becomes noticeable through its absence. But here is something important many people fail to understand. Your goal should never be to wait around hoping for regret. Because if your healing depends entirely on whether someone realizes your value later, you remain emotionally tied to the same situation that hurt you. Their regret cannot become your emotional purpose. Your healing must remain your priority. Because sometimes people regret losing you deeply, but regret still does not guarantee emotionality, change, or consistency. Regret simply means awareness finally arrived. It does not always mean transformation followed it. And this is why your focus must stay on rebuilding yourself instead of waiting for someone else's realization. Still, emotionally, the pattern remains true. People often regret losing those who genuinely cared for them because genuine emotional presence is difficult to replace. Loyalty is difficult to replace. Emotional safety is difficult to replace. A person who truly loved with consistency leaves an emotional imprint that casual connections cannot easily recreate. And over time, that truth becomes clearer, especially once temporary distractions fade and emotional reality settles in. Because eventually, people compare emotional experiences. They recognize the difference between surface-level attention and genuine emotional connection. They recognize the difference between convenience and loyalty. They recognize the difference between temporary excitement and real emotional stability. And by then, the realization often hurts more deeply than expected, because now they understand the value of what they lost. At the exact moment, they no longer have easy access to it anymore. One of the most powerful moments after heartbreak is realizing that real revenge has nothing to do with hurting someone back. It is not about making them jealous, making them suffer, or proving that you can replace them faster. Those reactions may feel satisfying temporarily, but they still keep your emotional energy connected to the pain. True power begins when their choices no longer control your peace. That is what becoming emotionally untouchable really means. It means you reach a place where your confidence is no longer shaken by their absence. Your happiness no longer depends on whether they regret losing you. Your emotional stability no longer rises and falls based on their attention, their messages, or their opinions of you. You finally return control of your emotional world back to yourself. And that transformation is deeper than anything external. Because after someone hurts you, there is often a period where your emotions feel completely tied to what happened. Your mind constantly replays memories. Your heart wants justice. Your ego wants validation. Part of you wants them to feel the same pain they caused you. But emotional healing shifts your focus away from revenge and toward freedom. Because revenge still keeps you emotionally attached, freedom releases the attachment completely. That is why becoming emotionally untouchable is so powerful. You stop needing them to suffer in order for you to feel healed. You stop needing apologies to move forward. You stop needing validation to recognize your own value. Their actions no longer define your identity or your emotional state. And once that shift happens, your entire energy changes. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop obsessing over their life. You stop checking whether they regret losing you, because your peace becomes more valuable than emotional attachment to the past. And this kind of emotional independence creates a completely different presence. People can feel when someone has genuinely healed. There is calmness in their energy, confidence in their silence, stability in their actions. They no longer radiate desperation, bitterness, or emotional chaos. Instead, they radiate self-respect. And self-respect is powerful because it cannot be manipulated easily. When someone becomes emotionally untouchable, they stop abandoning themselves emotionally just to keep someone else close. They stop lowering standards for temporary attention. They stop tolerating inconsistency that damages their peace. They become emotionally grounded. And grounded people move differently through a life. They choose relationships from clarity instead of loneliness. They protect their emotional energy more carefully. They recognize red flags faster. They stop chasing people who repeatedly show emotional inconsistencies because now they understand something important. Protecting your peace is more valuable than forcing connection. And ironically, this emotional shift often creates the deepest regret in the people who hurt you. Not because you tried to punish them, but because they realize they can no longer emotionally control or affect you the way they once could. Your reactions disappear. Your emotional dependence disappears. Your need for validation disappears. And suddenly, they are faced with the reality that you truly move forward emotionally. That realization can feel heavier than any argument ever could. But by that point, your focus is no longer on whether they regret it. Your focus is on yourself, your growth, your healing, your future. Because the greatest victory after heartbreak is not making someone else feel broken. It is becoming so emotionally strong, peaceful, and grounded that the pain they cause no longer has power over your life anymore. And sometimes, the strongest revenge is quietly becoming the version of yourself that no longer needs revenge at all.